X and Y is arguably the most broken generation in Pokémon TCG history. After Black and White upped the ante with an insane amount of power creep, X and Y gave us the sequel we didn't ask for, providing the game with some of the most ridiculous and hateable cards ever printed. Today let's talk about Generation 6, the generation defined by being broken. While X and Y was a generation that changed a lot, it's also a generation where a lot stayed the same. In the transition from Black and White to X and Y, the game designers decided to maintain many of the factors of Black and White, such as the appearance of the cards and the EX mechanic, which were two prize big basic Pokemon introduced during Black and White. Starting with legendary treasures and continuing all throughout X and Y, these basic Pokemon would also begin to include evolution Pokemon as basic Pokemon, such as this basic Charizard EX. This isn't to say that X and Y didn't shake things up though. X and Y began with introducing Mega Evolution Pokemon EX. To keep it simple, Mega EX Pokemon were two prize Pokemon that evolved on top of Big EX Pokemon. However, they would end your turn when you evolved into them. With high stats came an extremely high downside that kept Megas out of the spotlight initially. X and Y also had Fairy types enter the game. Fairy type's 6-year tenure in the game started with X and Y base, where headliners like Xerneas EX and the Baby Xerneas debuted. The most impactful fairy from the get-go was its Aromatisse, which could move fairy energy around your board. This kind of effect had been reserved for Stage 2s up until this point in the game, all the way back to base set. Moving energy around the board let decks utilize Rainbow Energy or Prism Energy to power up different attackers and even heal them with Max Potion. Unfortunately for Xerneas EX though, the real headliner of the set was Yveltal EX. Yveltal boasted the incredible Evil Ball attack, which did 20 damage plus 20 more for each energy attached to both active Pokemon. Yveltal EX set the tone for what X and Y was going to be. It's a generation similar to Black and White, just like how Yveltal is similar to cards from Black and White, but it's much more powerful. X and Y was going to be a faster, stronger Black and White. Flashfire introduced another of X and Y's most important cards, Lysander. This supporter card has the same effect as the modern Boss's Orders, where it brings a benched Pokemon into the active spot. After Pokemon Catcher from Black and White had been changed to require a coin flip, the game went without Powerful Gust. For like 3 months. Regardless, this period of the game was actually quite balanced compared to what would come. Big Basics did dominate the metagame, but there was also a handful of evolution decks succeeding under the radar, and walls like Pyroar that shut down these Big Basic decks. The 2014 World Championships, though, would ultimately be dominated by a Big Basic deck, which was Virizion Genesect, a Big Basic deck that dominates evolution decks and can break through walls like Pyroar with its G-Booster attack that goes through all effects. If you've been enjoying this video, please do be sure to give it a like. I would greatly appreciate if you would, because it helps the channel grow. Anyway, back to the content. Following the 2014 World Championships, X and Y ramped up even more with its next set, Furious Fists. While Lucario EX was the focus of this set, the fighting support was a net buff to all fighting types around, such as Strong Energy, a new special energy card, which boosted the damage of fighting Pokemon's attacks by 20. Old fighters like Landorus EX now had new life to succeed in the next year of the metagame, with new buffs like Strong Energy and new partners like Hawlucha from Furious Fists. Furious Fists also debuted another really important card, one little known one called Seismitoad EX. Game director of Creatures Inc. Atsushi Nagashima also has cards he regrets releasing as well. When asked by the gamer if there was a specific card he wished weren't released because of their impact they had on the metagame, Nagashima said, "There's so many that I can't even tell you," but proceeded to specifically call out Seismitoad EX, a card from the 2014 expansion Furious Fists, as one he specifically regrets. Seismitoad EX is one of the most powerful and disruptive cards ever released in the Pokemon TCG. Its strength comes from its Quaking Punch attack, which does 30 damage and prevents the opponent from playing item cards during their next turn. For modern players, this is like Badoo, but as the bulky main attacker of decks. Instead of having 30 HP and doing 10 damage, While being used to set up your own attackers, Seismitoad EX is your own attacker. Using damage buffs like Muscle Band, it could get an extra 20 damage, and using others like Poison from the Hypnotoxic Laser and Virgen City Gem combo would net it an extra 30 damage. Quaking Punch could easily do 80 damage, which would result in 2-hit knockouts on opposing Pokemon EX with the Poison's help. Seismitoad would only get stronger with the release of the next set, Phantom Forces, a set that would truly put X and Y's craziness in full force. Golbat and Crobat from Phantom Forces, which are reminiscent of the old Dark Golbat and Dark Crobat, would place damage counters on the opponent's board when they were evolved into, which let Quaking Punch stack even more damage while also being present in most offense-focused decks as a way to boost the damage of attacks without using item cards. Phantom Forces also released 2 of the strongest item cards in the history of the game. Versus Seeker gets any supporter card from the discard pile back to hand, letting decks have Lysander whenever they want it to attack benched Pokemon, and it allowed decks to play one of tech supporters for matchups and find them when they need them. This card was a 3 or 4 of in nearly every single deck for the entire time it was around, and it continues to be that way in the expanded format even today. Battle Compressor is another broken item card that searches the deck for up to 3 cards and discards them. If you're not a Pokemon player, this card may seem awful. Why would you want to discard your own resources? Well, the Versus Seeker that we just talked about pairs well here since you can discard all of your supporter options and find them whenever you want, but also many cards benefit from discarded pieces, like this Flareon, which Vengeance attack does more damage for each Pokemon in your discard pile, or this Execute, which can come out of the discard pile at any time with its Propagate ability. The real evil to come from this set was the eventual Terra Night March, a deck that did more damage for each Pokemon in the discard pile that had the Night March attack. Battle Compressor would easily discard these Pokemon, however it would take a while for this deck to truly be broken, since there was an even more broken card made to ensure the strategy did not get out of hand. Lysander's Trump card is maybe the most ridiculous card ever printed. It says that each player shuffles all of the cards in their discard pile back into the deck, excluding any Lysander's Trump card. Deck Out was no longer a win condition in the Pokemon TCG, and while it wouldn't immediately be apparent, this would cause some huge problems for the Pokemon TCG since powerful cards could be infinitely reused. Phantom Forces is one of the best competitive sets of all time, introducing many of the most broken cards that would define the game in the XY era. But what it did more than any other set was set in stone the identity that X and Y was an era defined by being broken. You were either going to play 15 cards on your first turn to launch a ridiculous attack, or you're going to do nothing at all, since Seismitoad EX's item lock or the Phantom Force's new Wobbuffet's ability lock would put you at their mercy. And that was only going to get more extreme going forward, especially with the release of Roaring Skies, which was released just in time for 2015 US Nationals and the World Championships. This set introduced X and Y's most broken Pokemon, Shaymin EX, which could use its setup when it was played onto the bench to draw cards until that player had 6 cards in hand. Using spammable item cards like Battle Compressor or Ultra Ball allowed players to empty their hand of cards and find Shaymin to draw up till 6 cards in hand again. Using Super Scoop Up or Scoop Up Cyclone allowed Shaymin EX to be reused to draw even more cards turn after turn. With this, Seismitoad EX decks could infinitely loop disruptive item cards like Hypnotoxic Laser and Crushing Hammer to create a nasty lock. With Versus Seeker, these decks could infinitely reuse the Lysander's Trump card and other disruptive supporter cards too. Maybe even scarier than Seismitoad Shaymin was the Executor deck built to counter it, that locked the opponent out of supporter cards with the Executor's blockade attack. Before Seismitoad Shaymin, the new scariest deck could dominate too much, the Pokemon Company would step in and ban Lysander's Trump card, citing the following reasons. One is that it eliminates one of the opponent's victory conditions, running out of cards in deck. 2 is that it allows the repeated use of powerful trainer cards, like I mentioned with Hypnotoxic Laser. 3 is that it allows drawing through your deck quickly with minimal repercussions, since they can always be put back. And 4, it extended the time of battles, with very lengthy turns. Despite this ban, the game wasn't magically fixed. Seismitoad EX was still in multiple of the strongest decks going into Nationals and Worlds. Seismitoad could use Crobat to boost its damage, or it could also use Garbodor to lock out abilities, such as the Garbodor played in 2015 US National Champion Jason Glazinski's Seismitoad Garbodor deck. Seismitoad EX could also be paired with other attackers since it could slow down the game long enough to power them up, and since most decks played its requisite double colorless energy anyway. Shaymin EX would also continue to see success in most decks. This draw ability would define the game for the entire time it was legal. Instead of having to knock out 3 big EX Pokemon to win the game, games from now on would often be ended by taking out smaller Shaymin EXs. It also enabled decks that played at an incredible pace, such as the World Championship winning deck Archie's Blastoise. This deck could easily discard its entire hand with Battle Compressor and Ultra Ball so that it could use Archie's Ace in the Hole on the very first turn of the game to put a Blastoise onto the board. Then this deck could power up Keldeo EX with their Blastoise to attack for a knockout on the first turn of the game. This deck strategy was on full display in the World's Finals, where Jacob Van Wagner ended a 2-game set in less than 21 minutes. This deck relied on another speed card introduced by Roaring Skies, which was Trainer's Mail, an item card that let players find any trainer that wasn't another Trainer's Mail from the top 4 cards of their deck, enabling these combo decks to reliably pull off the combo. In the absence of Lysander's trump card, Night March returned to the game as well, and in stunning fashion too. The new Shaymin EX and Trainer's Mail helped enable Night March to get turn 1 attacks of 180 or more damage pretty easily. This deck would go on to define the speed of the game for the entire next year. Another card that would define the speed of the game would be Wally, a supporter card that instantly evolves a Pokemon that isn't an EX. This was best used with Trevenant from X and Y base, which was a Pokemon that locked the opponent out of item cards if it was in the active spot. Later on, we'd also get Trevenant Break, which allowed Trevenant from X and Y to actually hit solid damage and have a lot of HP, keeping it relevant for the entire next year. Remember, in X and Y you're either playing 15 cards on turn 1 like Night March, or you're playing none because your opponent put their Trevenant out. If you enjoyed playing cards from your hand, you definitely wouldn't like what X and Y brought next. Ancient Origins introduced a nasty combo of cards in Vileplume and Forest of Giant Plants. Vileplume has its classic ability, Irritating Pollen, which locks both players from using item cards. This incredible item lock can be put into play on turn 1 with the help of the Forest of Giant Plants Stadium card, a new Stadium card that lets grass Pokemon evolve on the turn they were played or the first turn of the game. With this, decks could turbo out Vileplume as early as turn 1, especially with Shaymin EX and the help of the new Level Ball to help find the pieces. This deck also debuted a new turbo attacker, Vespiquen, which could use Be Revenge for more damage based on the number of Pokemon in your discard pile, just like Flareon from before. Similar to Night March, Vespiquen could use Battle Compressor to launch powerful attacks. However, unlike Flareon, it could launch them on the first turn of the game, since Forest of Giant Plants would allow this deck to evolve instantly. It could also play defensively by using Vileplume in the same deck to lock the opponent out from items after playing out all of its own. X and Y really hit its stride here. I could talk about the next year of sets, but it's a lot more of the same to be honest. Continually more turbo item cards were printed, however there were also increasingly difficult floodgate cards that completely stopped your opponent from doing anything at all. X and Y was the generation defined by being broken. A generation where boundaries were crossed, despite not having the set called Boundaries Crossed. It's a generation where it felt like almost every set was one-upping the last for how fast the game could be or how toxic a lock could be. Regardless, I think the X and Y era is a really interesting era to look back on. Even though many of its cards now occupy the expanded format ban list, I think that many of its timely formats can be fascinating to revisit. 2014, for instance, is a fun and interactive format with lots of big basics, whereas 2015 shows the full fallout with the power of Seismitoad EX on full display. 2016, on the other hand, shows the power of Vespiquen, Night March, and new powerful lock decks like Vileplume Walls, and new Seismitoad EX variants like Toadina. Going further, X and Y was one of the few eras where many of its regional championships would be played in the expanded format, which gives it a unique place in the history of the game. Is it balanced? Absolutely not. I much prefer how the game is now and in other more balanced eras. I took a 2-year period off of the game during this time to play more of the video games, and to be honest, I really didn't feel like I missed much in retrospect. However, for one generation it felt like there were no rails on the track, and no limit to what the designers could get away with for the first time since the original Wizards of the Coast era. Whether that's a good thing or not, well, I'll leave that up to you. Thank you all so much for watching, and thanks to everyone who I got to meet at the Milwaukee Brew City Old School Showdown. It was great getting to meet some of you and play some games. If you do enjoy this video, I'd also recommend checking out some of my old tabletop content where you can watch some of the 2014 and 2016 decks in action. Anyway, thank you for tuning in to the Whimsicast, and I will see you in the next video.